um do our chores today. That is a testament of your mercy and your grace. As we begin this event, O Lord, we pray, O King of Glory, that your spirit will take over this arena. And whoever that will join today will have something to take away with them that will help them throughout their journey. And for our presenters and those that were tapping into their brains and knowledge today, we pray that you continue to bless them, continue to elevate them in their field, so that at the end of the day today, they will know that indeed the King of Glory has blessed them and will continue to navigate them from height to greater height. All this we ask in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit in Jesus' name. Amen and amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Ma, for helping us with the opening prayer. Also, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is our CCG Streams of Praise in partnership with the program A Pathway to Success. And today our topic would be gearing towards medical school. And today we're going to be having 4 speakers, and I would be introducing them right now. So firstly, our first speaker's name is Dr. Divine Nwankwo. Dr. Divine Nwankwo is a neurosurgery resident at the University of Virginia with a strong background in neuroscience and neuroinflammation research. Originally from Lagos, Nigeria, he earned a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry, graduating summa cum laude, and went on to complete a dual MD PhD in neuroscience at West Virginia University. His doctoral research focused on cerebrovascular integrity in sepsis, reflecting his commitment to understanding and addressing complex neurological conditions. Dr. Nwankwo's work explores mechanisms that preserve brain microvascular endothelia function, with the goal of mitigating blood-brain barrier dysfunction and improving outcomes in neurological diseases. His research has been published in several peer-reviewed journals, underscoring his contributions to advancing scientific and medical knowledge. He has received several awards and honors, including an induction into the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society. He also made history as the first Black student to graduate with a dual MD PhD from West Virginia University. Dr. Nwankwo is deeply committed to integrating research and clinical practice to improve patient care as a functional and tumor neurosurgeon. Let's welcome Dr. Divine Nwankwo.
Hey,
Our
thank you.
next speaker for today is Damilola Fagade. Damilola Fagade is a dedicated third-year medical student at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine with a passion for serving underserved communities. She serves as the PR coordinator for Spartan Street Medicine, an organization focused on improving access to care for vulnerable populations. Damilola is also pursuing a public health certificate, blending her clinical aspirations with her commitment to community health. Damilola's long-term goal is to become a vascular surgeon, where she hopes to combine her surgical skills with public health principles to impact underserved populations meaningfully. Outside of medicine, she enjoys traveling, reading, singing, and indulging in crime TV shows. Her multifaceted background highlights her dedication to both professional excellence and personal growth. Our third speaker for today is Jalen Jordan. Jalen Jordan is a fourth-year medical student from Southfield, Michigan. He graduated with honors in chemistry from Michigan State University before attending the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Currently, he is conducting research at the NIH with plans to pursue a career in dermatology. His passion lies in reducing healthcare disparities, promoting health equity, and improving access to care for underserved populations. And our last but not the least speaker for today, is Dr. Dupe Akintola. Dr. Dupe Akintola, fondly known as Dr. A, in professional circles, is a highly accomplished associate professor of pediatrics and assistant dean of admissions at Wake Forest School of Medicine. She also serves as a faculty member with the prestigious Harvard Macy Institute and is an associate editor for MedEd Portal, the Association of American Medical Colleges online journal. Dr. Akintola specializes in providing compassionate care to extremely premature infants and supporting families navigating the challenges of intensive care nursery stage. She is deeply committed to mentoring and teaching, shaping the next generation of future professionals, including medical students, pediatric residents, neonatology fellows, and nurse practitioners. Her approach integrates the science and art of medicine, emphasizing both clinical excellence and human connection. Beyond her medical career, Dr. Akintola finds profound joy and fulfillment in her faith and family. She balances her demanding professional life with her role as a devoted wife to her husband, Pastor Yinka Akinola, and as a loving mother to their 6 children, affectionately called the Blessed Crew. She draws inspiration from her favorite motivational verse, Philippians 4:13, which says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," using it to encourage patients, colleagues, and the many young minds she mentors. Dr. Dupe Akinola is an intercessor and advocate for spiritual and academic excellence, driven by her unwavering commitment to her faith, her family, and her calling in medicine. Okay, let's all give a hand for all our speakers for today, and we welcome you all, and thank you so much for being here and giving us a time of your day to speak and share with us. And to start us off, can we if we all don't mind, our speakers, we would like if you could give us a brief overview about your journey to medical school. And we would like for Dr. Dupe Akinola to start us off.
Thank you so much, Busola. Thank you for catching that sort of, my last name is Akinola, not Akintola. I know this is being broadcast and it wouldn't matter except that I represent not just the church, I also represent the institution that I work for. So it becomes important that those names are done right. Yeah, so my journey to medical school, I actually went to medical school in Nigeria, in Ibadan, Nigeria, and I got a BSc in microbiology before I then went on after my 1 year mandatory youth service to do my MBBS in at the University of Ibadan, so College of Medicine, University of Ibadan. I graduated from medical school in 1994. Actually, it's my 30th anniversary this year of being out of medical school. And I did do pediatrics, a residency in pediatrics in New York, and then a fellowship in neonatology in Baltimore before coming to the Wake Forest School of Medicine to start off initially as an assistant professor and then, of course, move up in rank. Like you said, medicine is not just seeing patients, it's educating, it's researching, it's been innovative, it's been an advocate, for social justice. And so I've had the opportunity over the last few years, I'd say, of my life to be involved in all of that. So I I guess my interest in medicine started from when I was very young, like 3 or 4. And that was when in Nigeria I told my mom and my dad that I wanted to be a doctor. Everybody does that, right? And then as I grew older, I realized that I really did want to make that change, have an impact not on everybody, but just on babies, and so to have that impact on babies, I needed to do pediatrics and then neonatology as well. So that's how I got to this point that I am at, in my life's journey.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Dr. Akinola. Could Dr. Divine Wafa give us a brief overview on your journey to medical school, and also, I guess, talk about what inspired you to pursue a career in medicine.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Nice to meet everyone, and thank you for the invitation to come talk to you. I think my inspiration towards medicine really started from also a really young age, like around 11. I grew up reading some of the books authored by Benjamin Carson, Gifted Hands, and got inspired by some of the the surgeries that were done there, especially from a neurosurgical perspective. And that sort of like was the trigger point that led me to was pursuing neurosurgery as a career. And ever since then, I decided I was going to do neurosurgery. Did most of my high school and elementary school back in Nigeria, and then moved to the US for college back in 2011, and then started off as a biochemistry major. I knew I definitely did not want to do biochem, but I was definitely fascinated by the different, the curriculum itself that was ingrained at WVU for biochemistry. And I also wanted to like sort of differentiate myself from everyone that was doing biology to get into med school, and wanted to do something a little bit more different. And so I, stayed at WVU for my MD PhD, which was 2 years of the first years of the preclinical years of med school. Then you do the 4 years of the PhD, and after you're done, or however long the PhD takes, and then you do the last years of the MD program, both of which were very fascinating. I think the drive towards medicine continued, and you get inspired by a lot of models that you run into from neurosurgery, and I was still continue to follow that same pathway, and then matched at UVA for neurosurgery. I'm currently a PGY2 resident at UVA.
Thank you so much for sharing. And also, Jalen Jordan, could you give us a brief overview about your journey to medical school, and also what inspired you to pursue a career in medicine?
Yeah. So I guess like other people on the panel, my journey also started when I was relatively young. I think, I always said like, oh, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. And I think it wasn't until I had like my first like actual meaningful experience with like medicine where I was like, oh wow, like this is something I want to go into. So when I was in high school, my niece was born, and she was born at like 6 months or so, so pretty premature. And I remember at that time, when she came home, she had to have like a trach placed in her throat, and she had to have like all these feeding tubes also like put in, and it was a lot. And because of the fact that, like we all lived under the same household, there was a lot of times when I had to take care of her myself. And I remember like, even despite the fact that, this is a different sort of like kid you're looking at, it's a kid who has like a special needs in a way. I remember like also like being in love with the idea of like just taking care of my niece. And so I wanted to, sort of like have that impact on like similar families. So I went to college majoring in chemistry, just because that it's like the like physical science I love the most. Uh, and I always sort of knew I was going to be on the pre-medical track, and I had some experiences along the way that sort of like still solidified the pathway for me. Where I remember volunteering in the hospital and just shadowing doctors, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is like so cool what you're doing." I love, the thought process, thinking behind like the nuances between like picking or making a decision, and why you choose one treatment over the other. I remember also falling in love with research at this time. And I was in a basic science or a microbiology lab in undergrad, and I sort of like have continued on with a research career from then on. Currently, I am at the NIH, taking a break from my last year of medical school just to do research for a year. Uh, but all in all, like medicine, I think is just such a broad category where you can do so much with research, taking care of patients, advocacy, and so and so and so and so. And just to end, but sort of I came to the idea of dermatology when I realized that there's a lot of Black patients, especially with a lot of skin issues, but not a Black dermatologist to take care of those same issues. And so that sort of has been my long projected pathway towards medicine, towards dermatology specifically.
Thank you for sharing. Also, before I give room for the last speaker to introduce themselves, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we would like to ask that you would like to ask the speakers. Also, Damilola Fagade, could you give us a brief history about your journey to medical school and what inspired you to pursue a career in medicine?
Hey everyone, good afternoon, or morning. Like everyone, I wanted to be a doctor from a very, very young age. I think I fell in love more and more with medicine growing up because my mom worked in a few hospitals, and I spent a lot of my time like wandering the hallways and just looking at what is being done in the hospitals in Nigeria. And I continued to fall in love with the idea of being a doctor. When I moved here, I went to undergrad at University of Detroit Mercy, and I majored in biochemistry. For a while, I flirted with the idea of medicine versus engineering, like biomedical engineering, just being in the medical field in a different way. But after like going through a lot of shadowing, seeing a lot of clinical activities, I landed on the idea that I really wanted to be a doctor, and this is what I wanted to do. I went to Detroit Mercy. I graduated. I took a gap year. I took 2 years gap years where I worked in the hospital, and I just like through working and also shadowing some more people, I started to discover the advocacy part of medicine, and I fell in love with that even more. And just knowing that as doctors, you're not just treating patients, but sometimes you get the role of being their advocate and like fighting for your patients. So I continued to explore that. And when I started medical school at Michigan State University, and I found out that they had the public health certificate program where you get to learn more beyond just medicine and learning more about advocacy and your role as a physician and what more you can do. I decided to join the program, and in the program continuing to learn more. I love the idea of being a vascular surgeon from like research and shadowing vascular surgeons. There's not a lot of people of color in that field, and the major diseases treated by vascular surgeons disproportionately affect people of color. So representation, taking care of people that look like you matters, and that's why I'm interested in that.
Thank you all so much for sharing and giving us a brief history about your journey and path to medical school. And once again, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and you could like directly ask the speakers, or you could type your questions in the chat and then I could read it out to the speakers to ask. But while you're typing, I have a few questions that I could start off to ask the speakers. And if anyone like I guess I would try to moderate who like answers the questions. But our first question is I guess what undergraduate courses do you feel are most critical for medical school applications? And we could start off with Jalen and then Damilola, and then we could work our way around.
Yeah. So I think the ones that were most helpful for me were anatomy and physiology. And this is just thinking. So there was like just so much content you learn, especially within the first few months of medical school. And I think that, the analogy is you go from drinking water sort of out of a gardening hose to drinking water out of a fire hydrant. And it really is true. So I name anatomy and physiology in particular because I remember had I not had like any sort of background prior to medical school, that like these courses may have been like essentially impossible. There was a lot of terminology that we use in particular that I had only been exposed to in undergrad and wasn't really exposed to in medical school. And so I think that like that in particular really helped me. And I think also these are sort of going to be the courses where they're the most, I guess, like close to medicine in a way. And so I think it's good for sort of like building that foundation of like what you will eventually have to study in the first place. So I would say those two.
Thank you, Damilola.
I'll agree with Jalen. Anatomy and physiology for sure really helped. Just because I have a few classmates that had like other backgrounds, like public health, or because you can go into medical school with any degree, fortunately, but it's a little bit harder going from something else to learning anatomy and the physiology and all the medical part. Anatomy and physiology really helped. And another thing I noticed that helped me really is taking higher level bio classes. I was fortunate to take a few higher level bio classes and master level bio classes. So those kind of like gave me like a sneak peek into like how intense those classes could be in medical school. So if you have the opportunity, taking higher level bio classes will help in just learning a little bit more and seeing how like intense it can be in medical school.
Thank you. Also, Dr. Devine, the question again is, what undergraduate courses do you feel are most critical for medical school application?
Yeah, I think I don't feel like there's a particularly right answer to this question. So, and the reason being is like, with applying to medical school, like there are core, bio classes and the classes that you have to take in order to apply that can sort of help your foundation to do well in medical school. But from another perspective too, you could sort of lean towards doing something that you're probably never going to have to do again and sort of truly have that like general college experience and doing, like I would say like, in terms of majoring, pick whatever you want and do the core science classes that can definitely help you in medical school that you need to apply to medical school. Yeah, there is some advantage in like, having like sort of that background prior. But I think that most of the conversations that I even actually have with my patients are some of the things that I actually studied in undergrad. It's you sort of have that a different experience. You sort of like are able to like go beyond just like medicine and see other things for what they are. I've had some of the folks that applied to that have had like really good friends. I had a friend from that was actually working on Wall Street, decided he didn't want to do it anymore and decided to start medical school. My best friend is an accountant that studied finance and then decided she wanted to, do medical school too. So, yes, like sometimes you will have, more of you have to learn a little bit faster than everybody else that has that background. But I would say that I don't really particularly favor one major over the other. There are some core things that you have to do to apply to medical school. And like, a lot of medical school programs tend to look for those particular subjects because they sort of like show that, if you've done this, you're more likely to succeed because you have the background knowledge. But inherently, I think that some of the folks that do apply into medical school are really hardworking people, and like it will be tough. And I think Jalen said the biggest analogy, which is everybody sort of gets that it is truly like a huge amount of information in a short amount of time compared to undergrad. And that analogy, the garden hose to a fire hydrant is like sunk throughout the entirety of all med schools around the country.
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Akinola, the way to like change this question would be, I guess, what courses would you say you've seen in students' applications that you feel the admissions committee helps them know if a student is well prepared for medical school?
Thank you for that question. The beauty of going last is you can summarize what everybody else has said, and then you'll just make it into one whole. But seriously speaking, I realize that there's a need. Most medical schools, if not all medical schools in the US today, still require that applicants do the MCAT. So the MCAT is that medical college achievement test, and to do well in the MCAT, you have to know your biology, chemistry, physics, and math. There's some physics questions on the MCAT. There's biology on the MCAT. There's chemistry on the MCAT. So the BCPM. Now there's the critical reasoning as well as some psychosocial parts to the MCAT, but at least a third or more of your questions will come from those foundational sciences. And therefore, to be adequately prepared for a test that is high stakes, you have to do all those different courses. You know, some people like Damilola, she said she did biochemistry. All of that chemistry courses, they were given for her because she would have done them. Some others, like Dr. Nwafa said, they're non-traditional students. And so the BCPM foundational courses are not necessarily what they've done, but they're required to do it to pass the MCAT and show medical schools that they're up to the task that Jalen referred to as drinking out of a fire hydrant and not a garden hose. Because in the first 18 to 24 months of medical school, for my school is 18 months, that's the preclinical period. This is what you're going to be doing in one form or the other. I know that Damilola and Jalen talked about anatomy and physiology because perhaps that was something that they felt helped them understand the language, of medicine in that first 18, maybe 24 months for them. But there are other aspects of medicine, other aspects of the foundational courses, those like basic science courses that you need to know. Embryology is one, biochemistry itself, all those cycles, you have to know them to apply them. But like I said, before you get into medical school, you have to ace the MCAT. And so you need all those courses that will give you a solid foundation, help you ace the MCAT, and help you prepare well for the first 18 to 24 months of medical school.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Akinola. My next question, I guess we could start again in the same order, but the question would be like, what are some non-traditional courses you feel like that helped strengthen your application or helped you be more of a holistic applicant?
Yeah, good question. I think the one that's sort of like popping up into my mind right now is a humanities course I took. It was a humanities course that essentially just detailed the Israel-Palestine conflict and sort of just like the history behind it and sort of like where people's current stances are on it. And sort of the only reason I'm saying I think it was the most helpful, or at least made me the most well-rounded, is it did also like just further teach me to like sort of like appreciate the nuance that happens and sort of some of these like geopolitical conflicts. And later on, it did become relevant just because one of my roommates in medical school actually was from Israel, and we've had like lots of conversations around that. I've also have taken care of a Jewish patient also, and we've had conversations just sort of about like the land, the history, the nature of like just a lot of things. And so I'm saying it's been helpful, not even in a sense of like I wouldn't even say it made me the most well-rounded, but it was something I could talk about and something I could talk about talking about to patients essentially. So I could mention like, oh, hey, I do know a bit about this. I could mention how I come from a background where I am non-judgmental and I really just like want to learn from as many people as possible. And I could sort of like use this course in some of the conversations I've had as sort of like a proof of concept, essentially. So for me personally, that's what I'll say.
Thank you. The question again is, are there any non-traditional courses that you feel helped strengthen your application or just has helped you so far that you took in undergrad that has helped you so far in medical school or along your journey?
I think for me, not because during my undergrad, I was very focused on getting into medical school. I barely ever deviated from the plan. I took the courses the school needed me to take, and I took mostly biology, chemistry, and all of that. And thinking back, I sometimes wish I branched out a little bit more and took courses that I enjoyed, because the thing about is when you get into medical school, you don't get the chance to do all of that again. And college, at least the first year or the first 2 years, you get to explore and take different courses and see what you enjoy outside of medicine, because you're going to be doing medicine for the rest of your life. Just taking courses that you enjoy. And sometimes I wish I like went deeper into like philosophy and theology, because I really enjoyed those courses that I was made to take. And I wish I took some more courses just because it helps you like think deeper and question things. So I guess not in terms of like making you like more holistically better medical school applicant, but just learning more and doing things you enjoy, because when you start medical school, you get little time to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Nwafo, I guess answering the question of like, are there any non-traditional courses that you feel help strengthen your application as I'm not super sure, but as an international student applying to medical school?
So I think that some of the courses that I took that were helpful in undergrad. So I took a Greek and Roman culture class, and so that went into a lot of like, also talked about like some of the terminologies we use in medicine a lot, which are all inherently from that part of the world. So it gets you familiar with some of the prefixes that we all use, like, the QID, TID. So that sort of helped from that perspective, and also just like learning about Greek and Roman like history, and so that's something I'm like particularly interested into as well. Another thing I sort of like deviated from too was trying to do things that I would typically not do. So I also took some sociology classes, did some music and theater classes too as well. And I think music and theater was very different for me, but I just wanted to like see like go to plays and see if it's something that I enjoyed, and I actually did. I enjoyed that class a lot, and it was definitely putting myself in a a different more uncomfortable place that I would typically not be in, and trying to see if it's something I would like. And one other thing that I wanted to do too was I had this interest in curiosity and figuring out how things work, and the trajectory, and trying to do neurosurgery. So I felt that we didn't have a neuroscience major at WV at that time, but we had like, so I sort of made my own like emphasis in neuroscience to not only just like, address clinical questions and when you see patients every day, but try to investigate them from the basic science realm of things, and trying to answer questions at the bedside to sort of then translate them to the bedside. So I took more neuroscience classes too as well. But you'd be surprised though. I think most of the questions I actually got in my interviews were unrelated to most of the sciences. It was mostly on your experiences, your hobbies, and some of the things that you included there, some of the extracurriculars that you found. Because when it gets down to the T of things, most medical applicants tend to like, once the application process, they get a lot of interviews, they send out invitations. That means the med school actually has an interest in you and wants you to be there. Now it's mostly just like, are you a good fit for our medical institution? So at that stage and point in time, they tend to focus more a little bit on other aspects and extracurriculars, and how best of a fit that you are. So that was my experience. I think the having a very diverse course is very helpful in the way you interact with your patients, faculty, your colleagues that also come from different backgrounds. I think these were helpful courses that I took.
I think we have a question in the chat, and it says, if anyone's able to answer this is like a free-for-all. It says, as an international student, how did you navigate being a medical student, tuition, scholarship, gap year, MD, PhD, and all? I think this is directed to Dr. Waffle, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure. I think I can speak to a little bit of that too. And I was going to also chime in. Yeah, so that's the big thing about medical school in general. So when I applied to WVU Medical School, it was the first class they actually took an international medical student, and that was at that point in time, it was actually very difficult for international medical students to get into medical school, because one, you're worried about paying tuition, and also like the availability of scholarships that are available for you. And then MD PhD programs are typically, some will take and some do not. But the good part about being in the MD PhD program is that like essentially like your tuition gets covered, and you also get a stipend. So that's how I sort of navigated through that process. And I also got a few scholarships too for my medical school institution.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. A question for Dr. Akinola. So I guess looking at all the applicants that you've like helped get into medical school, like through your through the admissions process, what would you say has been helpful to help like students that has made students stand out in their applications?
Again, because I know this is being recorded, I have to sort of, help us out with the syntax here. So I don't help people get into medical school. What I do is I evaluate applications that are sent to medical school, and I don't do it alone. There's a committee on admissions that we have at the Wake Forest School of Medicine that is involved in the evaluation, in the selection to interview and the acceptance, of medical student applicants. So to the question of what makes an applicant stand out, I've heard it as a recurring theme in the other speakers who are here with me. And what will make an applicant stand out is just their passion, for whatever it is they want to do. The admissions office performs a holistic review of all applications. And so maybe I'll take a minute to talk about what we do in the admissions office. We have screening filters, and that's what I alluded to with your first question about what courses do I need to take in undergrad. You need to take courses that are BCPM courses that will help you succeed in the MCAT. Your science GPA also is something that you need to pay attention to, because for the Wake Forest School of Medicine, our screening filters are a science GPA of a 3.2. Yes, I said 3.2, and an MCAT score of a 500. We have lowered our minimum requirements just so that we can be inclusive. So these are the filters that screen you academics wise. So if you meet the cutoffs, then you get a secondary from us. Now, for Wake Forest School of Medicine, the secondary is where the money is. The secondary essays are essays that everyone's reading to some of those competitive undergraduate colleges, where you talk about who you are. Secondary essays, they are actually they are derived from the values of the medical school. So we value equity, it's our North Star. We value collaboration. We value people who are resilient, people who are flexible and adaptable. And so the questions are generated to sort of help us figure out medical students who have these qualities as well. So these attributes. And then, of course, I've talked about academics, I've talked about attributes. The third pillar for what we look for, the third pillar that we focus on really is also the experiences. So Dr. Nwafo, it's Jillian who talked about taking a gap year for research. Dr. Nwafo, I think he has an MD, PhD. My School of Medicine, we're not particular about a particular aspect of medicine. There are some schools of medicine who will want you to have a ton of research. Wake Forest School of Medicine doesn't want that. If you have research, that's good. We want to see what your lived experience is, who are you really? And how do you fit into the model medical student that we have at Wake Forest School of Medicine? So those experiences are important, your lived experiences. You may not have research, but you may have worked to support your family, or for a long time. That's important. You may be somebody who's peer mentored, students like yourself. That's important as well. You may be somebody who cares, for certain groups of people, like people who in hospice, the homeless people, somebody who really wants to serve the community. Those are important to us, to determine who you are and to figure out if you fit, if you align, if our attributes, if our values align with yours. So it isn't a one size fits all. It's more like a customization of your experiences and you being able to tell us, this is who I am and what I stand for, and this is how I can advance the field of medicine if I'm given an opportunity to come to your medical school. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Akinola, and thank you so much for the clarification on my wording of the questions. Our next question. Also, once again, if you have any questions, you could raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and ask, and or if you feel more comfortable, you could type your questions in the chat. And I think we saw there's a question in the chat, but I think it was already addressed, but I could reread it in case anyone wants to add anything else to it. The question is, as an international student who has a PhD but has an interest to pursue medicine, how do you navigate particularly tuition fee? If there's any comment on that.
I'm not sure if Dr. A might be able to provide a comment on that, because that's a very, I would say like that's a more difficult path compared to the MD PhD. Just because one of the benefits of doing the MD PhD is it sort of helps cover the tuition. I'm not sure, Dr. A, if you could comment on that.
So I'll just put this up front. We don't accept at this time international students at Wake Forest School of Medicine, and so that's not it's not a pathway that's open. But I believe that if an international student has a PhD and wants to pursue an MD, then what they're going to do is they're going to be in the same pool as everybody else, competing for the same, not federal aid because they're international, but scholarships that are institutional scholarships. There's some scholarships also that are not institutional, but are given to the, so what I mean by institutional, in the sense that the schools has some pot of money that they want to give to students, like what happened at NYU recently. And then there are some other opportunities that are outside of the institution that that this person can seek out and then bring those dollars into the institution. And of course, there's always the student loan as well, so the Grad Plus loan is there, if you're not able to get scholarships, or you have scholarships that cannot cover the cost of your tuition, there's always the opportunity, to get a loan, from some of these companies. But, that will be my last resort because of the interest rates that are attached to these loans. It will be to do well in the MCAT, have a strong personal statement, have a strong secondary statement, a secondary application essays, and just be outstanding. Because if you are, schools of medicine, they like to support people like that. You can't come just being kind of like one of, just like everybody else. You have to stand out. If you stand out, I think that you will be eligible for a good scholarship. And if that's not enough to cover your tuition, you may need to take a loan that might not be a whole lot.
Yeah. And I just put a link in a chat to send you what's like a PDF file or a guide booklet just about like the whole like medical school admissions process. And in that guidebook, I know that there's a section on financial aid and whatnot, and they have a list of schools that tend to be more favorable, both for like need-based financial aid, but also for merit-based financial aid. For example, like I know at my school, if you're a student that like essentially like stands out enough, even as a pre-med, then they offer a full tuition scholarship plus you get a living stipend. And I even know some students who have like gone down that pathway. And so in that book, there's also like a number of other schools that they talk about that do give out like full tuition, or at least, cover like most of your expenses for medical school. So would definitely recommend just downloading that guide booklet. I don't know if there's a section on for like international students, but there may be. So I think like regardless, it's definitely helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much, Dr. Akinola, for your words of wisdom. Our next question is about the MCAT. And I guess, if possible, could you share like some effective study methods you guys use to help you study through the exam? Because I've heard that it could be very rigorous studying for it and preparing for the exam in itself. Could we have Damilola go first?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the question is talking about like your, I guess, effective study methods you felt was helpful in studying for the MCAT.
The MCAT. So I took the MCAT twice because the first time I even though everyone told me you had to do this, this, and this, I thought I was smart enough to do it on my own the way I could do it. And I finally believed what everyone told me, which I should have done the first time. You have to like focus on studying for the MCAT. So the second time I took it, I used like the tutoring, I forgot what they're called, I used Kaplan, the Kaplan tutoring where you have like sessions and you go to the class and they tutor and they have like like the questions and all of that. So I paid for that and I used that. And that was very, very helpful because that helped me because I learned more by getting taught. Like, I'm not a reader. Reading and learning is harder for me. I learn more when I get taught something. So going to those classes, watching those videos on Kaplan, using the question banks and using the AMCA, the one provided through AMCA, were very helpful the second roundabout. Doing doing multiple questions, because all the teaching and all of that can only go so far, and you have to do the questions over and over and over. Doing the questions really helped with studying for the MCAT.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to that question? Jalen, Devon?
Yeah, only thing I guess I'll add sort of is as you're going through the questions and the practice tests and etc., that like truly like reviewing like literally everything. Like when you get a question right, why did I get it right? If I got it right, was it for the right reason or the wrong reason? And if I got it wrong, how can I like correct my thinking? I think like with a lot of the tests, it's like almost like a critical thinking test in a sense that like it asks you to evaluate yourself too. And I think like you really need to know how to do that, like as you go into these questions where some of them might be similar, but some of them may not be similar to like content you've been exposed to beforehand. So I think you have to have like the knowledge and the foundational skills to like already have a strong understanding of like, what you're doing right and wrong. And then being able to like look back and sort of just like adjust from there, I think is going to be major. Uh, yeah, I also recommend like the Kaplan review or the Princeton review, any of those like content review books, and then using those like sort of like to like build upon your first foundation just for like the content itself, and then transitioning to like the official like MCAT resources like to get an understanding of like how the actual test is, just because that of course like the official resources is going to be the ones that are most representative of what you're going to see. And then last thing I'll say for me is I definitely like struggled like in physics in undergrad, for example. And so what I would do is like I spent the most time studying for like physics and making sure I got a lot of those concepts down. And then, I would like continuously test myself in physics just to make sure that like I was understanding this and I can like, be exposed to a physics problem and I would be able to like at least get it right.
Thank you for sharing. I think there's a question in the chat for Dr. Akinola. It says, regarding the essays, I'm increasingly seeing essay prompts that ask applicants to describe any hardships or obstacles they have overcome to be where they are. Since you have read quite a number of essays in your career, how would you feel reading an essay where a student described their hardship as, in quote, not having adequate mentorship to guide them in their career? Does hardship have to be about poverty, sickness, homelessness, etc.?
That's an excellent question, but I want to ask to be given the opportunity to answer the previous question about the MCAT before I take this, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
So a couple of things. I agree with Damilola and Jaylene about using the review books, but for some of us, the review books might be expensive. It might be that you're not able to afford that, but that does not mean that you cannot pass the MCAT. Khan Academy has excellent videos that you can look at and you can, use, and those videos, they're free to help you with your reading. I don't know if Jack Weston costs as much as the Kaplan and Princeton reviews cost, but there's another resource that I've heard students using is Jack Weston, that Westin. He reviews concepts with you. Now, please, before you start reviewing any concepts, go to the AAMC website and just pull up the content that you need to know for the MCAT, because you do not want to be overstudying or understudying. You want to know exactly where the questions will be drawn from. And there's a document that's about 100 pages or more that has the style of questions, so question style, for the BCPM, the cards, and also the content, what you ought to be learning. So the way that the content specs will help you is that it will guide your reading. So if you're planning to do the MCAT, I would advise that you go look at the content specs and use it to guide your studying. The other thing I want to talk about is the UWorld. The UWorld is not very expensive. I think a Kaplan review is in the thousands. UWorld's about $200 and something, over $200 for a specific number of months. And forgive me, I don't remember those things. You can check it online. The reason I bring up the UWorld is because the UWorld will keep you humble. I'm sure that Jalen's done UWorld in medical school as well. Damilola has done it in med school as well. If you want to really be humble in studying, I suggest you do the UWorld, because it will make you feel like you don't know anything, And I mean, if you guys agree with me, give me a thumbs up. You feel like, oh my gosh, do I know? I don't know nothing. But guess what? It's building you up. UWorld, the way somebody described it to me, you remember I told you I went to medical school in Nigeria. So all of this, I'm learning from students, and I'm learning even actually from my own children. I have a daughter, who's on this path as well. This is how they describe UWorld to me. They say that UWorld takes you so deep that you're able then to figure out, and understand what is superficial. So your tests, they're not as deep as the UWorld. The UWorld will immerse you deeply into it, and you're going to not do well. So what I tell people, it's okay. It's okay for you, to do well in your bedroom. It's okay for you to get the 60s on your bed with the UWorld, because the UWorld is building a foundation for you to do well in the other tests. I am not endorsing any product. I'm just telling you what I've heard from students who have used all these resources. So please let UWorld be your friend. It's not as expensive as other resources. And then finally, like Damilola said, please invest in the AAMC's practice tests. I think there are more than 4 or 5 tests, because the way I ask people to use those tests is, 1, take a first test. Don't use the test by topic or content. Like, okay, I want to do biology now. I'm going to do the biology section of my full-length MCAT. You're not helping yourself. Take a full-length test from question number 1 to the last question of all the sections, and see what your score is. Let it be your baseline score. Then do all this studying and all the questions that my esteemed panelists have talked about, and then set another time for yourself to test again. See where you're missing stuff, where you're weak, solidify those areas, then test again. Use the practice tests to improve your understanding of the material. I always tell people you should be able to draw like a little bar graph, or, where this is me, baseline, this is me, first test, second test, and you see an exponential increase. If you do not see that increase, please don't do the MCAT because Jalen is doing it, or Damilola is doing it, or Dupe is doing it. Don't do it. It's not a race between people. It's you being ready for the test, because that's why there are multiple MCAT attempts, because everybody is just trying to sort of, stay with their little tribe, of students. Don't do that. Our races are different. Our lives are different. So run your own race and be ready. I want to end my talk on MCAT by saying that, at least for my institution, we worry about multiple MCAT attempts. And the reason we worry is because the AAMC has data that shows that the more your MCAT attempts, the less likely you will pass step 1 at the first attempt. And we don't want that to happen to our students. And that's why we want you to really understand your study strategy, your time management skills, your ability to retain when you're doing the MCAT, because once you have that down, you're just going to improve on those skills when you come to medical school. So please don't do the MCAT because Dupe Akinola is doing it next month. And you and her, you graduated from the same undergrad. No. Do it when you see that exponential increase in your scores. And I tell people, before you do the MCAT, be hitting more than 510, on the practice MCAT before you do the MCAT. Because if you have some sort of, testing anxiety or whatever, you might come down 5 points or 7 points and it's still okay. But don't go to the MCAT when you're getting a 505 or a 502 in your practice test. I do hope that I've sort of explained that clearly to those who are going to write the MCAT. Now to the question about the essays and hardship. An obstacle, simply defined, is just any situation that stands between you and your goals in life. If lack of mentoring is perceived as an obstacle to you, then it's your obstacle. It should have produced in you a delay in what you want to accomplish. It should have elicited in you some emotions, that were not positive emotions. And so when you combine the negative emotions with a delay in you being able to advance your cause, then you have an obstacle. It's kind of like, if a boulder falls on my street now, I can't get to work. That's an obstacle right there. So obstacles could be exactly what you talked about. I don't know if it's a male or female, this person, and I apologize because I don't know if you've combined your first name and your last name, and I don't want to say your name wrong. But what you said could be an obstacle. There are people who health-related challenges have prevented them from advancing their cause. That's an obstacle. There are others who, like you said, poverty have stopped them from advancing their cause. That's an obstacle. It could be home. It might not be homelessness. It could be the home situation. The fact that in the home, there's a lack of support in the home. And when I'm talking about support, it's not just financial support, the emotional support, the spiritual support, the social support. So all these are obstacles. Anything that stands between you and your goal stops you from advancing towards your goal is an obstacle. And I'm sure you can look around you, and see great things like this mentoring. But what I will talk about when you write your essays is that for any institution at all, read your essays like 3 times. If it says, tell me about a time, don't make your preamble about different times when this particular scenario happened. Pick your one time, describe it well, and describe how you've grown from it. So when it talks about, tell us about hardships or obstacles and how you have overcome, they want to see discrete, information about how you truly overcame, not things that are abstract. It is your story, it's your obstacle, and it is you who's taking care of that situation and who's advancing. So you want to talk about what you did and be very, very clear. In your essays, please avoid ambiguity. Avoid being very abstract. Of course, it's a balance. You also don't want to be very verbose. No, you want to be able to be succinct. Talk about what the issue is, and then talk about how you've grown from that issue, what you've learned from that issue, and how you're going to bring this into medicine. And I think that you will have a great essay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akinola. Is there anything anyone else would like to add, either in the previous question or this question?
I was gonna add, Dr. Akinola mentioned about the pricing. I remember when I was applying, I applied for the fee assistance program, and I looked up like their eligibility, and it has changed significantly from when I was applying. And one thing I always tell people that ask me is, even if you think you don't qualify for it, still apply. The worst they can say is no, and now you know. And with the fee assistance program, you get discounts from almost all the third-party resources. Because when I was trying to purchase the Kaplan, they asked if I had the fee assistant program, and I think I got like a 20 to 30% discount off purchasing that. So just apply. It's a fairly benign and easy process. Before you start like studying, paying for the MCAT and applications, apply for that first and know if you get it or not, because it does not apply backdated. It goes forward. So you apply for that first, and if you don't get it, you know you don't get it. And if you get it, that's a benefit for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to add a little bit into what Dr. Sort of mentioned. I think you know, with the essay, like you want to read it like yourself so many times, but I think it's also important to also have like people that you can trust read your essays, and that they can frankly tell you, this doesn't really sound right. And I'll give you a big example with Dr. A was saying with obstacles and hardship. I remember having that for one of my secondaries where I ended up getting an interview there. And I think if I would have phrased it the way I phrased it without one of my friends reading it and saying, like, this sounds like you're describing it like a hardship about somebody else, and you were just included in that picture. So I was like, and I read it again, I was like, actually, you're right. So I switched it because because we like it's like your package and your application is about talking about yourself, to put yourself in a positive limelight. And so we inherently want to not say anything negative about ourselves too. And so so it's really nice to have like people that you can trust and be like, yeah, this doesn't really sound right. Or I remember like having to draft my essays, like I think I drafted probably like 15 to 20 times. And one of the advisors at WVU would be like, yeah, you got to do it again and again. We kept going. And at some point I was like also getting frustrated. I was like, I just feel like it's okay. It just like sounds right. But like you want those people on your side to be able to tell you, frankly, like it could be better. You want to do this again. Like it sounds good, but like, what about saying this? Or how should I say this? And, and being patient about the process. It is truly like a journey that you have to, be able to do on your own, and not necessarily look about how other people are progressing and all this, because you don't really know their own story about things too. And it's perfect. Dami sort of said the right thing. The only answer you can get to anything that you ask for is no, or you could get a yes. And that's like truly there, like, or maybe in between. And maybe it's usually never a no or a yes, but it's something. There are only three answers that typically works in a direction for where you have a question for something. And if you get a no, you find a different direction. If you get a yes, that's perfect. And if you get a maybe it could work, and you still find different options. But you panicking about it and like thinking too much about it, usually it just like puts you in more of a panic state. Another example to that too is like the MDPs, just someone brought that up. Like I mentioned, like WVU did not accept MDPs, and on their website it literally says, we do not accept MD-PhDs. And so I was like, okay, I'm still going to ask. I asked the director back then, it's like, we don't accept international students for MD-PhD. And I was like, hey, I saw this on your website. I mean, it seems like the website had not been updated since like 2020. Has it changed? And I went there for undergrad. And I had a really good mentors that also supported me through the process, and like started to speak on my behalf too. And so that's how I also ended up being like the first MD-PhD student to like be accepted from a national perspective too. So like sometimes like it might seem like some avenues are not open, but like you can really ask, and there's nothing wrong in asking. Like truly the worst thing that someone can say is like a no, and you find something else. And but if you don't ask, you never know.
I'm going to do a quick piggyback on what Dr. Nwafor talked about, to say that when you give your secondary essay to your best friend or to your teacher, your professor, give it to them and ask them just one question. And this is what I tell, anytime I go on my recruitment tours, this is what I tell all the students, just one question. Would you like to meet me after you've read my essays? If the answer is no, then you can now drill down to why wouldn't you want to meet me? Because those essays, they are sort of like your introduction. These essays actually are what people interact with before they meet you. So if they read the essays and they don't feel like meeting you, then you won't get an interview spot. So that's the big question. Would you like to meet me after this? You've read this essay. And most times what you're going to hear after your first draft is a no, because you have not represented yourself well, like Dr. Nwafo said, And so don't be shy. Those people, they are on your team. You have to know that. So even when they tear apart your essay, they are your team players. They are not the admissions officers. And you will do well to listen to them because they have your best interest at heart. Those essays, they're like research, and I guess Dr. Nwafo can speak more to this, and Jillian as well. You have this great research idea, you pitch it, and then somebody is punching holes in it. It makes you feel mad. You really do feel mad because or maybe you've written, all of you who've done research, have you had your manuscripts rejected before? You don't even read the comments. You're just so upset, like, oh my gosh, I put in so much work. And that's how you feel. So I'm not telling you not to feel upset. Please feel upset after your best friend tells you that essay is not great. Then manage the emotion of being upset and then go back and fix it. Don't say, oh, they hurt me, they made me feel mad. I don't like this person anymore. No, don't do that. Go back and listen to why they've said what they've said, and that's what we all do with our manuscripts. After we're upset that they've been rejected, we go back and we do the revisions over and over again. So do not submit to any medical school the essay that you've written by yourself without having somebody look it over. And please, medical schools also know that applicants use AI. So please do not submit any AI-generated essay to the medical school without you, looking at it. It's there, it's out there. I will not be truthful if I'm telling you that we don't know that you do. We do know that you do, but make sure that it represents who you are, because that's a machine. That's a computer trying to think like you. So even if you're seeking some sort of help from AI, let it sort of help you understand what you ought to be doing, not what you should be submitting. I don't know how to make that clearer. Please don't submit any AI-generated essays to medical schools. That is what I'm going to say. If you use AI assistance, make sure that that essay is yours and it reflects who you truly are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akintola. Moving forward, I guess the next question I have would be, how can I stand out in the interview process? So like after passing the secondaries in the interview process, how do you stand out as an applicant? Let's go with Jalen first.
Yeah. So I guess my approach with like interviews was always, okay, so I'm already to the door in terms of, the application, that they've like seen me on paper and they like me as I am on paper. And now I need to prove I am this person who I am on paper, basically. And so I think in a way it's like truly just like being yourself. Like, I know it's going to be a nervous process, just like the whole idea of like interviewing, but at the same time, I think if you can like just come as like calm as possible, and then again just like tell them who you are, show them again that you are this person that you've like written so eloquently about. I think the biggest thing is being able to speak passionately and eloquently about your experiences. I think that's a big thing. And then just showing a lot of introspection. So being able to like look back on your experiences and being able to show like, oh, this is what they meant to me. This is why they mattered. And then this is how I'm going to like use them in the future. I think that's a big thing. And I think, yeah, I think comparison is also a like big enemy where, you shouldn't like at least go into the interview like, like comparing yourself to others, like, oh, maybe this person did better than me, or et cetera, et cetera. I think just going in with the mindset of, again, I'm going to prove to them that I am this person. I think that's at least like a good framework, and then just going on from there to speak about your experiences.
Thank you for sharing. Any other comments on this question?
Yeah, I think that I recall from from medical interviews, I did an internship in Cape Town, South Africa for 2 months there, and I rode an ostrich. And like I remember that I put that as like one of the things that I did. And it was so interesting that like most of the things we talked about in the interview, and even up to today, even when I applied for neurosurgery residency, was that experience. Like people were just fascinated that, oh, you're running ostrich, you bungee jump from the highest. It's like that, and that becomes the interview question throughout. But sort of people forget that you're actually supposed to be interviewing, but they're actually getting to know you as a person and how perseverant, and then also trying to understand why did you have an ostrich? Can you even ride an ostrich? And how does one do that? So I think that like sometimes putting yourself in things that you would typically not do, and like you might find someone that has a shared similar experience. I remember, being on the other side where I was interviewing an applicant for the MD PhD program, and he was talking about like how he had he would buy shoes and then like make them better and then resell them for like a dramatically high price. And I was just like so fascinated by that. And I recall that like truly that's all we talked about in his interview, and everyone connected really well with him. It was very different from every of the applicants. He had the stats already. It was just like, was it a good fit? Could you have a good conversation with him? And like, like what are some of the objectives that he likes? So like I think those like doing other things to like sort of help in the interview process, and it shows like how personable you are, and like you've already gotten the door. The program's already telling you like, hey, I'm interested in you and I just want to get to know you. And if you really go from that perspective and being yourself, again, like Jalen said, like don't compare yourself to others, like, and like so you're really seeing your the other co-applicants are going to try to get to know them too. They're going to be in the same like occupation as you. They're as interested as you are. You could learn something from them too. That's like usually my perspective on like the interview process.
I'd like to just make a few comments about the interview process. The interview process for medical school is just a little different from the interview process for residency. The emphasis during residency is finding people who can work in the team, in the healthcare team. And of course, to come to interview for the residency, your step 1 and step 2, all of the academic measures, they're all up to par. And so what residents and attendings want to determine is if you're going to be a good fit for the program. Our medical school, and I can only speak about the medical school that I work in, we have a slightly different approach to interviews than what has been talked about. And in fact, we changed our interview style based on what Dr. Nwafor talked about just now, which is the bias, implicit bias in interviewing. He rode an ostrich, and that was the conversation for most of his interview. For me, anytime I see people who write, oh, I'm interested in pediatrics, that's all that we talk about. Your interest in pediatrics, are you going to get there? So we've moved away from the traditional interviews, which is you have an interviewer and you're sitting across that interviewer either in a physical space or in a virtual space, and they're asking you questions based on your applications. We don't do that anymore. And I believe that there are quite a number of medical schools who've moved away from that as well. I apologize, I don't have the statistics, but there's a number, of medical schools who do what is called the MMI. That's a multiple mini interview. And what that is, these are short stations where you're given prompts, question prompts, and you are expected to respond to the prompts. Again, those prompts are anchored in certain values that we're hoping to elicit in you through the interview. I don't know how many people who are interested in medical school know about the CASPER. If you know about CASPER and you're somebody who's interested in medical school, please give me a quick thumbs up so I can see. So CASPER is a situational judgment test, and you have to write the CASPER as part of your application to the Wake Forest School of Medicine. The CASPER test and our MMI, they sort of align in the sense that where both tests are sort of trying to judge if you have certain attributes, your communication skills, your problem-solving skills. I talked about that earlier. So that's what we do. So we do the MMI. Prior to COVID, our MMI was in-house. But when COVID happened, it became virtual and asynchronous, and I'll get to that in a minute. And it's still virtual now that there's no COVID. And the reason it's still virtual is because we realized that we were able to then give that opportunity to people who otherwise would have been bogged down by how much it costs to fly, to North Carolina, and so we've continued to keep our MMIs virtual. The asynchronous, what that means is that you have a recorded prompt. You have somebody who's recorded the prompt, that you're meant to be answering, and you also have that prompt on the screen, and you respond to that prompt. There's no live interviewer with you. So you just record your interviews. And the advantage of that is the fact that we can then give your responses to 2 interviewers to evaluate and to give you a grade. And so that you'll fall somewhere in the middle, as opposed to having somebody who just finished a surgery, finished clinic, is at home at night, not really the best, and they're not having the best day, and then they're grading you. So we don't do the traditional interviews anymore. And there are quite a number of medical schools in the US who don't do the traditional interviews anymore either, who have pivoted to the MMI, the multiple mini interviews. And the multiple mini interviews are designed, again, to test certain attributes that you have, comparing that against the institution's vision, mission, and values as well. Thank you.
Just a few thoughts going off Dr. Akinola. I remember from my interview, that was the first time I ever heard about MMI. I know MSU, they do like a combination of MMI and traditional. You have the MMI in the morning, and in the afternoon, you have a traditional interview with one of the students. So just learning about what kind of interview process the med school does, because everyone does like a different combination and a different distinction. Just when you're invited for an interview, like just researching and knowing, okay, what kind of interview process am I going in for? Am I going for a traditional where I'm talking to one person? Am I going to MMI? Am I going for a combination? Is this a different iteration of that? Knowing the kind of interview you're going for will help you prepare mentally for the interview. And yeah.
Thank you all so much for your contributions to this question. This is a question, I guess, going back to, I don't know if it's like the MCAT or whatever, but it's anyone could answer it. It's, are there any hidden costs associated with applying to medical school and attending medical school that you don't typically know right off the bat?
Yeah, there are a lot of costs, at least for me, that are outside your tuition and your living expenses. There's like my school at MSU, we use a lot of third-party resources. I know a lot of med students use third-party resources that are also costly, and those are not included in your tuition. Some medical schools provide that for their students, but at MSU, they do not. So knowing the cost for all the third-party resources, because you have VMB, UWorld, AMBOSS, all of that, those are additional costs that you're going to incur as a medical student. And apart from that, you also have to remember that you have to pay for the STEP exams. And even though they mentioned it at the start, when I had to pay for it, it came as a shock. And those are pretty expensive also. So there are outside resources and the STEP exams and the prep for the STEP exams. And there are also like the MBME forms that you buy that have helpful for the exams. So all this extra resources that you're going to use to study and prepare for your exams are additional costs that some medical school provide or they don't. So just being aware of those costs are helpful. And for the application process, you have the primary application that you pay through AAMC, and you also have the secondaries. A lot of the schools have secondaries, and they can range from $50 all the way to like $200. So being aware of those costs are helpful. And that's why I mentioned the fee assistance program, which is very, very, very helpful, With that, you get the first 20 schools, you don't have to pay on the AAMC. And many schools, when you have the fee assistance program, they waive the secondary fee for you. A lot of schools do that. So if you do have the fee assistance program, if you apply and you're fortunate to get it, that helps with covering a lot of the costs associated with applying. But if you don't have that and you have to pay for many of that, and a lot of schools also provide like opportunity to request for a fee waiver for the secondary application. So just being aware about those opportunities and also about those costs is important. And thankfully, one thing COVID did for us is virtual. A lot of the schools now don't require you being in there in person for the interviews. So that help cuts down the cost, and a lot of it is virtual interviews.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just add in saying that, yeah, medical school can like sort of easily get expensive. One thing I'm thinking about is just as you're on like your clerkships and your rotations is just like the cost sometimes of getting to the hospital. So for example, for the most part, most of my rotations were like, within like bus right away, and that they all took place sort of like within this metropolitan city. But some of my rotations, were outside the city, and so I had to drive there. And luckily, I did come with a car, but I know some of my students like didn't, or some of my classmates didn't have a car, and so they had to like rent a car, and that expense was like just fully out of pocket. And then one other thing is just as you're rotating, also like some days you just may not have time to just like meal prep for the week. And so, on those days, you're probably going to have to like, buy takeout or just buy like hospital food also. And that can easily like add up. Like I remember at one point, I was like spending just so much money, like easily over $100 a week on getting back and forth to the hospital, and then plus like meals I would eat at the hospital. And so, yeah, the prices can easily add up. And so that's one thing to be aware of. And I guess like just another thing that comes into like time management where it's like, like leaving out earlier, plus like, meal prepping for the week, like is probably a way I could like, saved a extra few bucks, throughout the year. Uh Only other expense I would say when it comes to application in particular, I think is just like once you get into your school and once you've decided upon that school, there is like I think acceptance fee or like a holding fee just to hold your spot in the class. And mine, so I did apply and luckily I did get accepted for the holding fee or for the AAMC fee waiver. And because of that, they reduced the holding fee. I think normally it would have been like $1,000, which is, crazy. But for me, they reduced it down to 100, which was, not as bad. But that's one thing to keep in mind. And I think it's like unfortunately not very easy to find out like how much the holding fee is. So like during your interview, if you especially connect with like some of your student interviewers, I guess like, that's definitely a question where if you were able to get their number, I would just, like personally text them and ask them that just because I feel like, the people actually at the institution tend to be more uh honest and more transparent about like some of the like hidden fees you may not know about.
Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, Dr. Waffle.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add about like I think they've mostly like said a lot of the hidden fees and so obviously Jalen and Dami would know best about those aspects. But I think one of the also like the biggest hidden fee of med school is if you have to do like rotations elsewhere when you're applying for residency, that is very costly. And also like I think the other thing too is like, once you match and you have to move to a different place, those are, I think those for me were like, like you knew they were coming, but then when it actually comes, you're just like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money that I have to spend to move from one place. And I think that, like in retrospect, I didn't think about, that at that point in time, but in retrospect, if I go back in time to like plan, like, if I've gone into med school like the first week, what I would have done being more financially like wise now is I would have like done an automatic like, maybe $20 every week into like an account that I cannot touch at all that has like some sort of like interest rate to sort of catch up with inflation. And that would amount to, like, at the end of the 4 years, at least 4,000 to sort of help that transition period, or to help with, like, if I had to do like sell by somewhere else in the country. It could be $50 and that gets you to like 10K. I'm just saying, those are some of the things that, like, you also have to be like, like, medicine is what you're there to do and to learn. And obviously things will pay for itself in the long run. But I think also being like, financially adept and also reading books about finances are also important. Those sort of help you curb those expenses. And there are a lot of, like, books, as well as like podcasts on like how, like, being financially responsible, as someone that's also going to the medical field, and those will help you immensely in curbing some of those issues.
Thank you all for sharing. My next question is, I guess, more so for Dami and Jalen. Are there ways to get involved in research, like during medical school, if you're not doing like a like a combined MD PhD?
Yeah, so definitely ways to get involved. And I've been doing research, for example, since my second semester in med school. The first semester, I thought I would just like wait, get, sort of like acclimated to the medical school environment and the curriculum. And then from then on, that's when I decided to get involved in extracurriculars. But yeah, overall, I think it's very accessible. And then one thing to keep in mind is like, as a medical student, I think you've sort of like proven your worth in a sense of like you've shown already that you can sort of like commit to things and you can follow this pathway. And so I think research mentors and PIs, they tend to be more accepting of like, oh, hey, this medical student is interested in a project, out, help them out just because it's, essentially free labor in a lot of the cases. Uh, there still has definitely been a lot of like cold emails that I've sent just, due to like, like some people's schedule, they can get like definitely very busy. But yeah, I think research is definitely going to be available. I will say, caveat is it probably does vary like institution from institution. But for the most part, I think mentors tend to be relatively accepting of helping students like get involved in different projects. And one thing I'm thinking about is at one point in time, I remember I was reaching out to various mentors and just like trying to find projects. They unfortunately didn't have any for me, and I was sort of upset with myself. So I just mentioned it sort of like offhandedly to like one of my academic advisors, and he was like, "Oh wow, like in what ways can I help you?" And so he actually like reached out on my behalf to like some of his like friends also that were like in that field, and he was able to like find projects for me. So I think like if you're also like not having the best luck in terms of finding things, and reaching out to like mentors that are in the field, even if they aren't involved in research themselves, they may know a few people to help you out essentially.
Also, I guess to like reframe the question before Dami talks, like, yeah, aside from like being involved in research, I know like med school can be very hectic. Is there time to be involved in other things aside from studying for med school?
Yeah, so first question about the research. Luckily at MSU, they have like a Office of Research and Development where like in your first year, you apply and you like send in your application with what kind of research that you're interested in, and they match you with a mentor. So the med school actually pays like they fund mentors that take students on, and you're able to do research because one of the requirements of the school is you do research in your first year as a project, and in your third and fourth year, you also have to do another research as a project. So you're required to do at least two research projects before you finish med school, and the others is on you. So they have that, and being affiliated with MSU also gives us that kind of opportunity to like email and reach out to people in the MSU campus and around for research opportunities. And for my third and fourth year, I'm in the city of Flint. And Flint, there's a lot of research, especially relating to public health. So I get to reach out to people here in Flint and like be involved with various research in the community also. And with time for other stuff, there's not a lot of time, but there's also a lot of time if you make it. It's about what you make time for. I've been lucky to be a part of different organizations that I was passionate about and wanted to be a part of, and also serve on the e-boards of those organizations. It's just about carving out time in your day and just committing, like honoring your commitments and be like, okay, I want to do this. So maybe 1 hour a day or 3 hours a week, just finding time in the little time you have to commit to those organizations and things that you want to do outside of med school. There's no time, but you can make time. And it's not easy, but there's time to make time for what you want to do.
Okay, thank you so much. I guess similar question, but I guess are for Dr. Nwafa, how like is there time? Because I understand that there's a time crunch in the MD PhD program, especially since you're trying to finish, you start MD, you finish your PhD, and you're trying to get back into MD and just graduate in a reasonable amount of time. Uh, is there is there a lot of pressure since there's this like set, at least from what I understand, from what I've heard from people, there's this like time, like because I've heard it's like 7 to 8 years to finish the whole thing. But how true is that? Is it really 7 to 8 years?
Yeah, I think most institutions try to stick to at least like an 8-year timeline. I know prior to that, usually they would say like, the MD PhD first 2 years, however many amount of years in your PhD, and then you come back for the last years of med school. And unfortunately, I think one thing that is very helpful to us is like on the MD side, the deans usually like tend to like push the PhD folks like, hey, this guy's got to come back to med school before they forget everything they learned in the first 2 years, and also before you have to like there's a timeline that you have to take all 3 steps together, and like if you're the more time you spend in the PhD, like you might actually have to take all your steps all over again. And so like with that, like I think that when I was doing my PhD at that point in time, like there were people that that did the neuroscience PhDs and it took 6 to 7 years, and they spent 6 7 years in the PhD, and then they actually went back, or they took 5 years. It really does depend on like one, how well your projects are working. Unfortunately, it's very different from medical school, because most times in medical school, like it's grit, it's hard work. You put in the work, you put in the time, and usually like you see things go like in a linear fashion. Like the PhD is different, is that you can put it in as much time as you want. Data is data, experiments are experiments. Most times it's not going to work out with your hypothesis, and like you have to have this like idea on how you think about stuff. Is just like not taking that, hey, this thing is not working, it failed. Not necessarily, it might not just be the pathway that you've chosen, and you have to like go back, take a second, think about it. And I think if you sort of take that approach towards the PhD, that helps you finish in a more expedited fashion. Now, I've had people that have finished their PhDs like in 2 to 3 years, and I did mine in 4. And I've also had folks that have been there longer, and at WVU. But I think the most important thing now is that like we have like support from a lot of the MD programs that actually are now like from the MD side of things that actually push the PhD folks to realize, like they're more of a bridge between the MD and the PhD, not necessarily like they can't stay in the air, because a lot of MD programs now would actually count the first 2 years of med school as the preclinical part of the as the like like the where you sort of like you learn in classes for the PhD versus actually doing the experiments and then doing your proposal. They count step 1 as actually like the qualifying exam for the PhD. So it gives you an expedited process. A lot of the programs are actually speaking, are supporting the MD folks and like transitioning really well. And I think like as the time moves on, like you have a lot of programs like making sure that MD PhD, since they're only doing their PhD in 3 to 4 years, I think you still have some that like, go to 5 or 6. It really does depend. It also depends on the type of PhD that you choose. Neuroscience PhD are typically like just the PhD in general. Like 5 years ago, we're averaging like a 9 to 10 years to finish. Now it's been pushed to 7 to 6. So those tends to be longer. Well, actually, if you do a PhD, like, in something else, like we have the PhD, it's called in translational sciences, that typically you can get done in 3 years. It really does depend on your path and how if you choose to start doing research earlier on in med school, like once you start as an MD PhD student, you're like, okay, I'm going to start in like in my first year trying to get like, prelim data, finding a mentor. Those are all things that help you get done faster. And the people that have seen that succeed that don't take a long time, they find their projects earlier. They have an idea of what they want to do. They find really good mentors that can support what they want to do, and then like they typically get done earlier. And the difference between the PhD too and the MD is, like whereas the MD relies on you as an individual and your own success and how you study, getting your dissertation work done really depends on like a committee of people to say like, hey, I feel like this person has done a body of work and they're ready to go. And that can be very different with very different committees. Some will want you to publish, like you have to publish a Nature paper to go, which is insane. And whereas people will be like, we want you to publish not just one paper, but we want you to do this and this. So like it's very, very arbitrary. But again, a lot of the MD side of things, and I'm not sure if Dr. A is still here, like they really, really support the MD PhD student in like emphasizing to the PhD folks, like these guys are MD PhDs, they have a timeline. It's important that like, and they also check with them every single like 6 months to ensure that all the MD PhD students are meeting their timeline. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And also, I guess another question on that. I know like for the MD, you apply to like the different schools. For the MD PhD, do you have to apply to both the MD school and the PhD school? Or it's more so just one application that applies to both?
Some programs like they don't have like the PhD things, or they might have to do your PhD somewhere else. But most programs typically have like an MD PhD combined program, usually like in an MSTP form that's supported by the NIH. And so like the applications are two different applications. The interviews are two different interviews, because both the MDs and the PhD folks have to agree that they want to take that applicant. So you do have to fill out a separate MD application with the WMC, and then you have to fill out a separate PhD application. The interview process, at least at WVU for how it works, is if the PhD folks liked you and the MD folks did not like you and they felt that you were not a good fit, then you're not gonna match. You're not gonna go to that institution. But if the MD folks like you and the PhD folks did not like you, then they'll probably just accept you in the MD alone program. So that's how it worked at my institution. So like the MD folks actually they had to like you for you to do the MD, and then the PhD folks might not like you, but you still get to go into the MD program alone and not the MD PhD program. But if the PhD folks only liked you and the MD folks were like, no, definitely not, then you don't get into that institution.
Thank you for sharing. I guess another question I had, we could start off with Jalen, is I guess for like people that are freshmen in college, what would you say foundation for medical school if they do plan on going to medical school after graduating from undergrad?
Yeah, so honestly, I would truly just say focus on enjoying the journey. Like really just enjoy undergrad. I think, like a lot of times you get like lost in the sauce, for lack of a better word, if you're just always like just so clear cut focused on like I need to get into medical school, I need to have this GPA, I need to get this on the MCAT, and I need to be doing all these different things. And it's very easy to get burnt out if you're, focused on that sort of mindset. So I would just say truly enjoy undergrad for what it is. Like medical school, it'll be there eventually. Like, whether that's like you don't take a gap year, or whether that's, you take 3 to 5 gap years or more. Like, I think just enjoying the journey is probably the biggest thing I can advocate for. Like in my case, I did go straight through, but there's times where, in medical school, I was like, oh wow, I wish I would have taken a gap year just to, like have sort of a break, just like to also like learn more about myself. Because, like up to now, I've only been a student basically since I was 5 years old. And so it's nice to sort of like, also like explore the world, travel, and do all these things that you may not be able to do once you're in medical school. And, that sort of is another reason why I'm taking a research here currently, where I'm not in medical school, but I can have the flexibility of, sort of like working in the real world for a bit. So I think, a lot of these things, like a lot of the things on your application, just sort of use them as sort of like boxes that you need to check off. But there's no timeline for when you need to check off these boxes, if that makes sense. So, having research, of course, that's good, but you don't need to have research, necessarily like at this moment. Just make sure you have the experiences necessary by the time you go to apply that can, show that you're a well-rounded individual and someone that's able to stand out in medical school or able to survive through the rigor of medical school.
Does anyone have anything else to add?
Yeah, just going off of Jalen's comment, just enjoy your freshman year, enjoy your college experience, because in the end, whatever you do, I feel like whatever you do in undergrad, it's the way you present it that matters, because you can do everything right and still present it wrongly and not be accepted. Because like in my first 2 years of medical school, I worked as a screener for the admissions office, and I read through a lot of applications, and you see students with everything right, but I still won't recommend them for an interview because what was the point of all these things? Like just being able to, everything you do, just being able to say, I did this because of this, and this is what I got out of it, and this is why it's going to make me a better doctor. Just being able to reflect on everything you do throughout your journey and putting that in the application is very important. Do what you like, do what matters to you, but being able to reflect it and being able to present it in a way where they'd be like, okay, this makes sense. I see what this person did, and I see how this is going to make them a better doctor, a better student, and a better fit to the school. Matters.
Thank you. Dr. Nwafo, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think that, as I feel like being on every single aspect of thing, right from like high school, I think one of the advice I got from like folks during college was like, oh, you should definitely just enjoy the moment of high school. And then I got into undergrad, and then the message is like, oh, you should definitely enjoy the moments in undergrad. And then you get into medical school, and the residents would tell you, oh, you should definitely enjoy the moments in medical school. I think the thing is like, and I'm sure like if Dr. A was here too, she would tell me like, oh, residency, you should enjoy residency, you never have it again. And these are truly like defining moments in your life, to be honest. Like and one of the things that my nursery attendant sort of told me one time is just like, like with everything you do is just make sure you're doing the right thing. And that's like, and that was in regards to patient care. And like, I would say like, it truly is a process that like you're never going to have again, whether it's undergrad or like high school or med school. These are timelines that are like involved in a trajectory to where we're going, and even residency. And you have to you make the best out of it, and you enjoy the process. And like you will have like obstacles and hardships throughout that process. But like I really want to emphasize it to everybody, like in whatever career that you're doing, whatever aspect in the timeline that you are. It's like, really enjoy that process. Like neurosurgery residency sucks, but like, like when you go in there, like in terms of like, being awake and like, you miss out on a lot of events. You're the person that goes into the hospital the earliest, the last person to leave, and like you're required a lot from you. And sometimes you might not just have that much to give to. But you have to like reemphasize and go back in the time to see like, where you started off from. And like like we all wanted to do medicine since we were really young, right? And we've been pushing towards that trajectory. And then you have to go back to that yourself that really wrote that application and you wanted to get into medical school, and why you wanted that, and the passion that you had at that point in time. And refocus on why you're really truly doing this. Like for Jalen, he's talked about like how he wants to do dermatology because he's interested, in solving a lot of the issues that we have in like, in the Black community in regards to that. And, Dami talked about the emphasis on like public health and all. And those are driving forces that I think we all like should stick to. And like, remember that, there is time, but and enjoying all that you want to do. And it's also like demonstrating your passion for the thing that you love the most, and touching lives as you go through this process too, as well, and helping each other out. I think that's the biggest thing It's just like, like the fact that, we have like different people that can come here to talk about their experiences. And we also just like have to figure out how we can help each other out through this process. It's tough. But like I would say, like emphasize the same thing too. It's just like take the time to care for yourself and enjoy the process. It truly is like the one of the best things that best professions that you can get into. It's hard work, but there are aspects, and you always, like Danny said, there's always time, and you can make time. And the most important thing to learn too is that you can make time for yourself too. And then once you make that time for yourself, you can care for other people that need you.
Thank you so much for thank you all so much for sharing. I think the second to the last question I have is the question is how can I guess as someone that's a senior in college, how can I strengthen my application if I don't feel ready to apply yet for medical school?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of that, it's maybe going to be a bit more personal in terms of, like why don't you feel ready? So that's something where the whole process really is about, introspection and reflection and looking back. And so, if you can look back and say like, oh, in what ways am I not ready? What should I have done to get more ready? Or, like what am I missing? What am I lacking? So I would say take whatever, the answer to that is and just doing something now. So for example, if it's like, oh, I may be lacking sort of my clinical experience, then, it's not too late to sign up to like volunteer at a hospital, for example. If it's, I need to be a better researcher, maybe you can like find a project at this moment. So I would say, like find out whatever it is that you are lacking in, and then just acting on that. One thing I will say, again, it's just that, you know, like, uh, like these things are not sort of like on a time requirement, like even the whole applying to medical school, like it's not a time requirement. Like I have some of my classmates who are younger than me and are like 22 versus some classmates who are in their 30s. And so like everyone really does have their own timeline. So, like maybe you don't feel ready right now to like either take the MCAT or, apply to medical school. That's fully fine. Like that's like literally okay. And in some ways, I think it's like, it may be even better in a sense. So that way you do have like real world experience that like, if you work a job for a few years, you can come back, you can bring that and integrate that into your medical career. Like one of the residents I know now, she actually was a full-blown teacher before going to medical school, and she taught second, third grade, and she's able to like incorporate that into like her career now. And I think she's an OB-GYN, but again, that's the way that she's able to incorporate her teaching experiences into how she like teaches residents, how she interacts with her patients, and just into her daily life. And so, again, I would say if you don't feel ready, then it just may not be the time to be applied. But that's just like you just have to look back and say like, oh, do I need like more experience? So I need to just like wait, like whatever it is, just try to figure that out. And luckily, it does seem like, there's a bunch of mentors that were on this panel who like also probably would be, willing to speak to you if you reach out to them. So that's the last thing I would just say on that topic is just reaching out to mentors and seeing, what sort of like advice they may have on, whatever reason you're not feeling ready, and then just like incorporating that advice into your life and your application.
Thank you so much for answering that. I have one last question, and anyone can feel free to answer. It's what is one piece of advice you wish you had received before starting medical school?
Think for me, one piece of advice I wish I had received was enjoy your time now, because med school is very busy and it can be very overwhelming, and you have time for things you love, just like enjoying your time now, living in the moment, doing things that you want to do, because you might find time to do those in med school, but I feel like like residents will tell you this is the most time you're gonna have now in med school because you're not gonna have any more time in residency. And med students will tell undergrads, this is the most time you're going to have now. You're not going to have any time in med school. Just enjoying the time and also enjoying the process. It's a long process. It's a tedious process, but enjoying the process and not getting lost in it. Like just enjoying every step and the growth and the process, and just enjoying the process from undergrad to med school to what's beyond. Just enjoying each and every process and how you get there is one advice I wish I got.
Yeah, so I would definitely agree with that. And in a similar sense, I would definitely say, like enjoy it as you're going through it. And even if it's, like you interact with like a specialty you may think, like you definitely don't want to do, just like try to take every single thing that's like thrown at you as like a learning experience. So for me, for example, I am not someone that was really interested in like being an OB-GYN. But on the rotation, for example, I took it as like, okay, when am I ever going to get the opportunity to like, help deliver a baby again, for example? When am I ever going to get the opportunity to see a C-section again, And also from that, like, let's say I encounter a patient who's been through a C-section. In what ways is learning from this going to help in my future patient interaction? So all that to say that like there's going to be so much stuff that's like thrown at you, and then just truly try to like learn it and truly try to recognize the unique position that you're in, because it's not many people will have been able to say that they've gone through the things that you've gone through. And I think in some ways you can sort of get lost in a sense of like, like you become very desensitized. But then, like sometimes I would like talk to my friends about like what I learned or what I saw and what that and whatnot. And they're like, oh my gosh, you saw that. And so like just like truly recognize and appreciate the position you're in as a very like unique learning opportunity. I don't think, there's like many or maybe other careers where it's like you can truly learn from speaking with people and watching people, and then just, like seeing their interactions, but also being able to, like build a unique partnership where, like you're healing them. And so I guess just like recognizing that unique position, and then, yeah, just having appreciation for that. And then last thing also is really just enjoy your time. So I think like Demi was saying, there's time to make time. And so I know some students, for example, who are very passionate about like going to the gym, who, even at their busiest, they were still going to the gym. And so whether that was like, going late at night or just very early in the morning, there's going to be time. And you may have to make sacrifices. Like maybe you don't watch an extra episode of that like Netflix show you're going into, but like there's still ways to appreciate what you're doing as you're doing it. And I think if it's something that's truly meaningful, you'll be able to like make the time for that, throughout your schedule, whatever that may be.
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Wongful, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I sort of like buttress the few things they've already said. I think just being curious is very important. And even if it's something that you've always wanted to do, I think staying curious like not only helps you in the longer, but also helps like the patients that you're going to be taking care of. Like I've been interested in things that you're not also familiar, like Jillian sort of mentioned, like having an interest in OB-GYN. And like I think the mindset that I always had, like especially with my clinical rotations, is like, like I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna learn the most I can about this specialty because I'm probably not gonna ever do it again. But like if my patient had like this, I want to know, like I want to know like what to do in the interim until the right specialty comes there, and it's interesting because that's actually very, very helpful. And I've seen this like so many times on, like just like on the award itself, like where things just happen that are not neurosurgical and you have to deal with it until the right team shows up. And whether it's a GI bleed or, like a patient that we're just running on and like, you're like, oh, what's that weird spot in their neck? And then it turns out to be melanoma. And that's all about curiosity. It's just like staying curious, like whether it comes to like research, or things that you want to do. It's just like, like, and that benefits not only yourself, going beyond to knowing, like, your patients, like, like in the morning, sometimes it can be difficult when you're, talk to patients around, then you're just mostly looking at the data and everything. But it's also like important to like maybe step back later on in the afternoon to like, like ask them, where are they from, what do they do, and all that stuff. Those are the things that patients really remember. When you look at the surgeons that, or physicians that tend to be really successful, is how they tend to like communicate with their patients, how they get to know their patients, and when you get to know them, like they really do appreciate that. And like medicine is it's one of those professions that that requires a lot of trust. I mean, like someone like is trusting you to like, essentially like take out half of their bone and then do surgery on the brain. That's a unique trust that you can't get from anywhere else. And it's nothing to be taken granted for, and it does require like a lot of hard work. If someone's going to trust you to do that, then it also requires a little bit of work and effort from your own point of view too. And this is, the same thing for whatever you choose to do. Like there is a lot of trust that your patients have for you. And that requires from doing the simplest things, just, like whether it comes to like studying for step 1, studying for the MCAT, like you really want to give it your best shot, because one day, like you're going to have someone there that is really going to need your help. And some of those things are going to come back to sort of help you navigate that process for yourself, but also for the patient.
Thank you so much all for sharing, and we really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day and busy schedules to be here. Yeah, I would pass it on to Pastor Titi to help close it up.
So I want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you, Jelly. I've not met you before, but I want to say thank you so much. I want to also say thank you to Dami. I know Dami very well. I think I was with her on her journey before she got the admission. So I'm so proud of her, and I know. And then to Dr. Nwafor Divine. It's nice having you here. I'm grateful. Thank you so much. And I hope to meet you one of these days. Likewise, Jelena, I hope to meet you one of these days. And to my mentor, Dr. Akinola, I want to say thank you. Though she had to leave because she had somewhere she had to be. I want to say thank you. And to everyone that joined, those that asked questions, those behind the scene, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being a part of this. God bless you. And I want to say a Merry Christmas from all of us from RCCG Streams of Praise. I want to say thank you. Thank you for making the webinar very beautiful. And thank you for being a part of it. And by the time we enter 2025, we're going to have another webinar in April by the grace of God. And we want to say thank you. Let's just say a word of prayer before we close. Father, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for this program, for everything we've learned. We ask that you help us to put them to work. For everyone who is planning to apply to the medical school, Father, we ask that, Lord, you help them, you grant them with all the knowledge you've acquired today, that you help them and guide them, oh God, that they'll be able to walk through it successfully in Jesus' name. And for our sister Dami and for Jalen, who is in medical school, we ask that, Lord, you continue to help them and grant them good success. And we pray for Dr. Nwafor, as he's in his residency, you grant him good success. That, Lord, at the end, all glory will be ascribed unto you. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for all you've done. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. We have powerful people that connected, and we're grateful. We appreciate you at all times for being a part of this, and thank you for encouraging us. God bless you, and do have a wonderful day out there. God bless you. Be safe.
Thank you. Be blessed, everyone.
Hey, take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.